Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe. I'm Adam, and today we're bringing you another educational English podcast designed to help you improve your listening skills, expand your vocabulary, and understand world events in a simple and clear way. Wherever you're listening from, whether it's on YouTube, while you're studying, or on your daily walk, we're truly happy that you're here with us. Before we start, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the English Globe, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from. We'd also love to hear your thoughts and opinions about today's topic because it's a question the entire world is watching very closely.
Thank you, Adam. Today we're discussing a fascinating and very important topic. Will China overtake the US economy sooner than expected? This question appears in newspapers, economic reports, business discussions, and even classroom conversations. Many English learners want to understand global economics, but the language used in financial news can sometimes feel complex or confusing. So in today's episode, we're going to explain everything in clear, simple English while teaching useful vocabulary related to economics, growth, productivity, and global markets.
Exactly, Julia. Our goal is not to make predictions or choose sides, but to help you understand why this question is important and what it means for the world. When we compare the economies of China and the United States, we are talking about two of the most influential countries in terms of trade, technology, manufacturing, investment, and innovation. Understanding their economic relationship helps you follow global news more easily, and at the same time, you learn how English is used in discussions about business and international trends.
That's right. This topic is especially important because economic power affects many areas of life. It influences job opportunities, the price of goods, global cooperation, technological development, and even international decision-making. When people talk about whether China might grow faster than the United States, they are really talking about how the world might change in the next 10, 20, or 30 years. For English learners, this is a great chance to learn real-world vocabulary while understanding issues that shape our future.
And that is why we chose this topic. Many experts produce reports, charts, and predictions about economic growth, and sometimes these reports use difficult words like GDP, inflation, market consumption, productivity, or economic projection. But don't worry, we will explain all these ideas step by step in simple English. By the end of this episode, you'll not only understand the main points of this topic but also feel more confident reading or listening to economic news in English.
Before we continue, we want to kindly ask all our wonderful listeners to support this channel. Please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments which country you're listening from. We always love hearing from our global learning family, and we also want your opinions. Do you think China will overtake the US economy? Do you think it will happen soon, or not for a long time? Your comments help us create better content and help you practice English at the same time.
Exactly. Communication is an important part of learning. When you comment, ask questions, or share your thoughts, you are actively practicing English and training your mind to think in the language. And remember, here at the English Globe, we are not a news channel. We are an educational platform. Our purpose is to help you understand English better and make global topics easier to learn.
And this topic, China's economic growth, is one of the most discussed issues in international economics today. For example, China has the world's largest population and one of the fastest-growing manufacturing sectors. The United States, on the other hand, leads in technology, innovation, scientific research, and global finance. Understanding how these strengths compare helps students understand why this question is so important for the future of global development.
You're absolutely right, Julia. And as English learners listen to this discussion, they are also learning how to express ideas about growth, comparisons, change over time, and global trends. Words like expansion, output, investment, development, and economic balance appear often in news articles and documentaries. So listening to podcasts like this helps you become more familiar with these terms in a natural and meaningful way.
So, dear listeners, stay with us as we explore this subject carefully and clearly. Take notes if you can, listen actively, and try to repeat new vocabulary. Don't worry if some words are unfamiliar. We will explain everything step by step. This episode is designed to help you understand the world while also improving your English, and that's exactly what the English Globe is all about.
Great. Now that we've introduced the topic and explained why it matters, let's begin by looking at the basic strengths of both economies and what makes this comparison so interesting to economists around the world. Stay with us as we take our first step into understanding the economic relationship between China and the United States. Before we can compare the economies of China and the United States, we need to understand one of the most important ideas in economics: GDP. Now, don't worry if this sounds like a difficult term. GDP simply stands for Gross Domestic Product, and in simple English, it means the total value of all the goods and services a country produces in a year. Think of it like this. Every time a factory makes a product, every time a shop sells something, every time a company provides a service, all of that activity adds to the country's GDP.
That's a great explanation, Adam. And to make it even easier, let's imagine an ordinary day in a small town. When a farmer sells vegetables, that adds to GDP. When a teacher gives lessons, that also adds to GDP. When a person buys coffee, when a mechanic repairs a car, when a builder constructs a house, when a company makes phones or laptops, every one of these activities counts. GDP is like adding up all the work, all the production, and all the services in a country to see how active and productive the economy is.
Exactly, Julia. And this helps us understand why GDP is so important. When the GDP of a country grows, it usually means more jobs, more businesses, more income, and more activity. When GDP slows down, it can mean the opposite: fewer jobs, less business activity, and slower economic movement. So, economists, governments, and researchers look at GDP to understand whether a country's economy is strong, weak, improving, or slowing down.
Now here's where things get very interesting for today's topic. When we compare China and the United States, we must understand that there are two different ways to measure GDP. The first method is called nominal GDP, and the second method is called GDP based on purchasing power parity, also known as PPP. These terms sound complicated, but we will explain them in the simplest way possible so you can understand them clearly.
Let's start with nominal GDP. This is the measurement that uses international market prices, especially the value of the US dollar, to compare economies. So, if the United States earns $1 trillion in production and China earns $1 trillion in production, nominal GDP compares those numbers using global prices. It is a good way to understand the size of an economy from a global finance perspective, and it is the measurement most commonly used by international organizations and news reports.
But nominal GDP does not always show the whole story because the cost of living is different in every country. This is where purchasing power parity, or PPP, becomes important. PPP asks a simple question. How much can people actually buy in their own country with their money? For example, $1 in the United States might only buy a small coffee, but the same amount of money in another country might buy a larger meal or more items. So PPP adjusts for local prices to show how strong people's buying power really is.
Exactly. So when we measure GDP using PPP, we are asking, how much real value do people get from their money in that country? And this measurement often makes developing countries look stronger compared to developed countries because their cost of living is lower. This is why, when measured by PPP, China is already ranked as the world's largest economy. But when measured by nominal GDP, the United States is still number one. This is why people say the answer to our question depends on which measurement you use.
And that's exactly why these measurements matter so much when we compare China and the United States. Nominal GDP helps us see which country has more financial power on the global market, important for international trade, investment, and currency strength. But PPP shows us how much real value people can get inside their own country, important for understanding the daily strength of an economy and the real living standards of the population.
So, when someone asks, which country has the bigger economy? It's not as simple as choosing one or the other. It depends on what you want to measure. If you're looking at total financial power, the United States still leads in nominal GDP. But if you look at real purchasing power, China is already ahead. This is why economists sometimes disagree. They are using different measuring tools to answer different questions.
And for English learners, this is a wonderful chance to learn vocabulary that appears in many economic discussions. Words like output, productivity, consumption, inflation, living standards, and market value all connect to GDP. As you listen, try to remember these terms and notice how they are used in conversations about global economics.
That's right. Understanding GDP gives you a strong foundation for understanding the rest of this podcast. In the next sections, we'll look at how China grew so quickly, why the US remains powerful, and what experts think might happen in the future. But everything begins with GDP, because it's the basic tool that helps us measure, compare, and understand the size of different economies. To understand whether China might overtake the United States economically, we first need to look at how China grew so quickly. Over the past 40 years, China has experienced one of the fastest periods of economic expansion in human history. In the late 1970s, China was a mostly agricultural society with limited industry and low income levels. But after a series of major economic changes, the country transformed into a global manufacturing center, a leader in technology, and one of the most important players in world trade.
That transformation did not happen by accident. China began by opening its economy to the world, allowing foreign companies to invest, build factories, and create jobs. Many countries wanted to produce their goods in China because labor costs were lower, and China had a very large workforce. As a result, China became known as the world's factory, producing everything from clothing and furniture to electronics and machinery. If you look around your home, you will probably find many products with the label Made in China.
Another important part of China's growth is its population size. With over 1.4 billion people, China has the largest population in the world. This gives the country a huge labor force and a large group of consumers. A big population means there are many workers available for factories, construction, services, and technology sectors. At the same time, millions of people buying food, clothing, phones, and other products creates a strong internal market that helps fuel economic activity.
Yes, and as China's economy grew, millions of people moved from rural areas to cities in search of better jobs. This urbanization created new opportunities, faster development, and more modern infrastructure. Cities like Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Beijing became major centers of business, technology, and innovation. They attracted new companies, international investors, and skilled workers from across the country. This movement of people was one of the biggest drivers of China's rapid economic rise.
Technology also became a powerful force in China's modern growth. In the early years, China focused mainly on manufacturing simple products. But over time, the country began producing more advanced goods: computers, smartphones, electric vehicles, solar panels, high-speed trains, and more. Today, China is home to some of the world's largest tech companies, including companies that make mobile payment systems, online shopping platforms, and advanced electronic devices. This technological progress has helped China move from basic manufacturing to high-value industries.
Another big reason for China's economic success is its export strategy. China exports goods to almost every country in the world, and these exports generate large amounts of income. By making products at low cost and selling them internationally, China earned money that could be used to build roads, bridges, power plants, schools, and research centers. This export-driven growth model allowed China to strengthen both its industries and its national development, creating a cycle of continuous expansion.
Of course, economic reforms also played a major role. In 1978, China introduced a policy known as reform and opening up. This policy allowed private businesses to grow, encouraged foreign investment, and reduced government control over some industries. These reforms made China more flexible, more innovative, and more attractive to global companies. As people started new businesses and factories expanded, China's economy grew faster than almost any other country in the world.
To understand how impressive this growth has been, consider this. For many years, China's economy grew at more than 10% per year. Most countries struggle to reach 3 or 4% growth, but China reached double digits for a long time. This high growth rate lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, created a strong middle class, and changed China's global position. Even though the growth has slowed in recent years, China remains one of the world's fastest developing economies.
China's development also changed global supply chains. Many international companies depend on Chinese factories to produce parts or complete products. This means China is deeply connected to global markets. When China grows, businesses around the world feel the impact. When China slows down, global trade also feels the effect. This shows how important China's economic rise has become for the entire world.
Another key point is that China has become a major hub for research and innovation. The country invests heavily in science, engineering, artificial intelligence, space technology, and renewable energy. Chinese universities have improved rapidly, and companies now compete in areas that were once dominated by Western nations. This shows that China is not only a manufacturing power, it is becoming a leader in advanced industries that shape the future.
All of these factors, population size, urbanization, manufacturing strength, technology growth, exports, and economic reforms, explain how China rose from a developing country to the world's second-largest economy in just a few decades. When we talk about whether China could overtake the United States, understanding this history is essential. China's past growth helps us understand its present power and its future potential.
And for English learners, studying this topic teaches you useful vocabulary connected to economics and development. Words like reforms, exports, infrastructure, manufacturing, innovation, and urbanization appear in global discussions every day. By learning these words through real examples, you build stronger comprehension and better speaking skills.
That's the purpose of this podcast, to help you learn English by understanding the world. China's economic story is one of the most important stories of our time, and knowing how it developed gives you a clearer picture of today's global economy. In the next section, we'll look at the strengths of the United States economy and why it continues to be a global leader. The United States has remained the world's largest economy for many decades because it has a unique combination of strengths that work together like the parts of a powerful machine. And one of these strengths is the country's long tradition of innovation, which means people constantly create new ideas, new products, and new technologies that help businesses grow and help workers produce more in every industry. And this culture of creativity gives the U.S. an economic energy that keeps moving forward even when global conditions become uncertain or challenging.
Another major advantage of the United States is its strong system of research and development, which includes world-famous universities, scientific laboratories, and technology companies that invest large amounts of money in studying new discoveries, developing advanced tools, and solving difficult problems in health, energy, communication, and engineering. And this continuous research helps the country stay ahead in areas that are important for long-term economic leadership.
The U.S. economy is also supported by the fact that the American dollar is the world's most widely used currency. And this means that many countries, banks, and businesses around the globe use the dollar to buy goods, sell products, invest money, and make big international transactions, giving the United States a special advantage because global demand for the dollar helps keep its financial system stable, strong, and trusted, even during times when other economies face pressure or uncertainty.
When we talk about consumer spending, we see another important strength of the United States, because Americans buy a very large number of goods and services every year, and this high level of spending supports millions of businesses, encourages production, and keeps money moving through the economy in a way that creates jobs, supports innovation, and helps new companies grow in almost every industry, from technology to entertainment to transportation.
A large part of the U.S. economy comes from the services sector, which includes industries like education, tourism, finance, entertainment, healthcare, digital platforms, and professional services. And this sector not only provides jobs for a huge number of people, but also creates high-value economic activity that keeps the country competitive in a world where services, information, and technology have become more important than traditional manufacturing.
Another key advantage is that the United States has a very open and flexible economic system where people can start businesses easily, invest in new ideas, and compete freely in the market. And this freedom to create and grow companies means that new products, new services, and new industries appear regularly, giving the economy the ability to adapt quickly to changes and to stay strong even when global conditions shift.
The United States has also maintained strong global influence because American companies operate in nearly every part of the world, offering products like computers, smartphones, movies, software, cars, airplanes, medical technology, and many other goods that shape global markets. And this international presence helps the U.S. economy remain connected to worldwide trade and gives American businesses opportunities to grow beyond their own borders.
Another long-term strength of the United States is its diverse population, which includes people from many backgrounds with different skills, cultures, and ideas. And this diversity allows the economy to use a wide range of talents, perspectives, and experiences that help industries stay creative, innovative, and capable of solving new problems in ways that support growth and stability.
Many experts also point out that the U.S. legal and financial systems make economic activity more stable because companies have clear rules, protected property rights, and access to strong financial markets where they can raise money for long-term projects. And this predictable environment encourages investment and helps both local and international businesses feel confident about operating in the United States.
Because of all these strengths, innovation, research, the power of the dollar, high consumer spending, a strong services sector, global influence, economic freedom, and a diverse population, the United States has been able to maintain its position as the world's top economy for a very long time. And understanding these long-term advantages helps us see why many experts believe the US will continue to play a major economic role even as China grows rapidly and becomes more competitive on the world stage.
When we look closely at the forces that could help China grow even faster in the coming years, one of the most important areas is the rapid development of advanced technology sectors, because China has been investing heavily in fields like artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, robotics, and renewable energy, and this investment is creating a powerful environment where new ideas, digital tools, and modern machines are shaping industries in ways that increase productivity, support new companies, and strengthen China's ability to compete internationally without relying solely on traditional manufacturing.
A major example of this technological progress is China's push in artificial intelligence, where researchers and companies are working on systems that can analyze information, recognize patterns, and support everything from online services to transportation networks. and this growth in AI not only helps China build more efficient industries, but also positions the country to become a leader in global digital development, which is important for long-term economic strength in a world that depends more and more on smart technology.
China's electric vehicle sector is also expanding at an impressive pace as companies produce affordable EVs, improve battery technology, and build large networks of charging stations, and this progress allows China to lead both the domestic and international market for clean transportation, giving its economy another strong engine for growth because electric vehicles create jobs, encourage innovation, and help the country build industries that match future global demands for environmental sustainability.
Renewable energy is another field where China is moving quickly as the country invests in solar power, wind power, hydroelectric projects, and new methods of energy storage. And these investments not only create cleaner forms of electricity, but also support the development of massive industries that can produce technology for other countries, meaning China can become a major supplier in the global market for green energy products while also improving energy security at home.
Technology alone does not drive growth, and China understands this, which is why the nation invests continuously in infrastructure projects like high-speed rail lines, modern highways, advanced ports, large airports, and digital communication networks, and these projects make it easier for goods to move, for people to travel, and for information to flow, creating a strong foundation for economic activity and helping businesses operate more efficiently in cities and rural areas.
Education is another important factor because China has expanded its universities, improved scientific research programs, and encouraged millions of students to study engineering, mathematics, business, and technology. And this focus on learning ensures that future workers will have the skills needed to support high-tech industries, manage complex systems, and contribute to new discoveries that keep the economy dynamic, stable, and ready for long-term advancement.
One of the most significant internal factors supporting China's future growth is the rise of its middle class, which includes millions of people who now have higher incomes, better job opportunities, and more ability to spend money on products, services, and travel. And this increase in domestic consumption gives the Chinese economy another source of power, because a large middle class means more local demand for food, clothing, technology, entertainment, transportation, and housing.
As this middle class continues to grow, Chinese companies can rely less on exports and more on sales inside the country, creating a more balanced economy that is less affected by global market changes. And this shift also encourages businesses to create new products designed specifically for Chinese consumers, giving companies a reason to innovate and invest in industries that match the interests and lifestyles of the population.
China also uses long-term economic strategies to support future growth, and one of the most well-known examples is the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a large and complex international development program that aims to improve trade connections, build infrastructure, and support cooperation between China and many other countries. And while opinions about the initiative vary, it is important to understand it in simple and neutral terms, as a strategy designed to expand China's global economic relationships.
This initiative includes building transportation networks, supporting trade routes, and creating partnerships that allow goods and investments to move more easily between regions. And when viewed from an economic perspective, the Belt and Road Initiative is one of the ways China tries to increase its international influence, develop new markets for its companies, and strengthen long-term economic ties that could support stable growth over time.
All these factors, technology development, infrastructure investment, strong educational systems, a growing middle class, and long-term international strategies, show that China is actively building the foundations for continued economic growth, and understanding these elements helps us see why many experts believe China will remain a major economic force in the future and may continue to grow at a pace that keeps it highly competitive with the United States. As we continue our discussion, It is important to understand that while China has many strengths that could help its economy grow in the future, it also faces several challenges that could slow down its progress. And one of the biggest challenges right now is the economic slowdown that has become more visible in recent years, because the period of extremely fast growth that China enjoyed for decades is gradually giving way to a more moderate pace, which means the economy is still expanding, but not as quickly as before, and this slower growth affects businesses, investments, and job opportunities across the country.
When we talk about a slowdown, we simply mean that the economy is not growing as fast as it used to, and this can happen for many reasons, such as higher costs for companies, fewer new factories being built, or less demand from customers at home and abroad. And these kinds of changes make it more difficult to maintain the same level of rapid expansion that China experienced during its major industrial boom.
Another major challenge is China's aging population, which means that the number of older people is rising while the number of young people entering the workforce is decreasing, and this situation creates pressure on the economy because fewer workers are available to fill new jobs, run factories, develop technology, and support services, while at the same time, more resources are needed to provide healthcare, pensions, and social services for older citizens.
To understand this in simple terms, imagine a classroom where every year fewer new students join while more older students graduate and leave. Over time, the classroom becomes smaller and less active, and something similar can happen in a country when the working-age population becomes smaller, because economic activity depends heavily on the number of people who are able to work, create products, and support national growth.
Productivity is another issue that becomes important in this conversation, because productivity refers to how efficiently workers and companies can produce goods and services. And even though China has many skilled workers and large industries, increasing productivity becomes harder as an economy grows bigger and more complex. So China now needs more advanced technology, smarter management systems, and stronger innovation to maintain fast progress, and this transition can be challenging.
Beyond domestic issues, China also faces pressures from global supply chain changes, which means that international companies are starting to move some of their production to other countries for reasons like lower labor costs, diversification, or reducing dependence on a single location. And this shift affects China's manufacturing sector because many foreign businesses played an important role in its early growth, helping create jobs and bringing investment into the country.
Trade tensions are another factor, and although we are not discussing political positions, it is true that disagreements over trade rules, technology access, and market competition can influence how easily goods move between countries, and these tensions sometimes lead to new restrictions, slower negotiations, or changes in business strategies, all of which can reduce the speed of economic growth, especially for an economy that depends heavily on exports.
A related challenge is the issue of debt, which simply means the amount of money borrowed by companies, local governments, and some parts of the economy. And while debt can be useful for building infrastructure or supporting new projects, too much of it becomes risky because it creates financial pressure and limits the ability of organizations to invest in future projects. And many experts say that China needs to manage this balance carefully to avoid long-term economic stress.
Global demand is also slower today compared to the fast-growing years of the past, meaning that many countries are buying fewer goods, building fewer factories, and spending less in general. And since China is one of the world's largest exporters, weak demand in other countries makes it harder for Chinese companies to sell the same amount of products as before, creating another obstacle for high-speed growth.
All these factors, slower global demand, changing supply chains, higher debt levels, and trade pressures, combine with internal challenges like an aging population and lower productivity growth, making it more complicated for China to keep expanding at the very fast rate it had in the past. And these challenges do not mean that China will stop growing, but they do mean that maintaining the same speed is more difficult as the economy becomes larger and more mature.
Economists often say that it is natural for growth to slow down after a country reaches a certain level of development, because the early stages of growth, such as building factories, improving infrastructure, and increasing exports, are easier to achieve, while the later stages require more innovation, stronger education systems, higher tech industries, and more complex management of financial and social issues, which take time and careful planning to develop.
So, when we look at whether China can overtake the United States economically, we need to consider both sides, the strengths that support China's growth and the challenges that could slow it down. And understanding these challenges in simple English helps us evaluate global economic discussions more clearly, without taking sides or making predictions, but simply learning how economies work and what factors influence their long-term progress.
These challenges explain why China's growth may not continue at the same speed as before, and why becoming the world's largest economy is a complex process with many variables. But studying these points gives us valuable insight into how large economies evolve, how global trends shape national development, and how different countries manage the balance between opportunities and obstacles. As we continue our exploration of global economic power, it is important to understand that while the United States has been the world's largest economy for many decades, it also faces several challenges that make it harder to stay in the number one position. And one of the biggest challenges is rising competition from other countries that are growing quickly, developing new technologies, and building strong industries, which means the U.S. must work harder to maintain its leadership in innovation, production, and global influence.
When we talk about rising competition, we are not only referring to China, but also to many developing nations that are becoming more active in global trade, technology, and manufacturing. And as more countries build advanced factories, train skilled workers, and attract investment, the economic landscape becomes more crowded, giving companies around the world more choices about where to produce goods, where to do research, and where to sell their products.
Another challenge the U.S. faces is the long-term decline in manufacturing, which means that fewer products are made inside the United States compared to many decades ago, because many companies moved their factories to countries with lower production costs, and this shift reduced the number of manufacturing jobs and weakened some industrial regions, creating difficulties for workers and communities that once depended on these industries for stable income and economic growth.
This change in manufacturing has also led to more dependence on global supply chains, where parts and products are made in many different countries before reaching American consumers. And while this system can be efficient, it also creates risks if global trade becomes slower or more unpredictable, making it harder for the US to rely on its own industrial base when it needs to produce certain goods quickly, such as medical equipment or advanced technology components.
Political division is another challenge that economists often mention, and while we do not take any political position, it is true that disagreements between different groups in the country can make it harder to create long-term plans for the economy, because strong policies in areas like education, infrastructure, energy, and research require cooperation and stability, and when political conflict becomes intense, progress in these areas can slow down or become inconsistent.
Debt levels are also a concern for many analysts, because the US government has borrowed large amounts of money over time to support public programs, social services, and economic stability. And while borrowing is common for many countries, higher debt means the government must spend more money on interest payments, which reduces the amount available for things like education, technology development, and support for new industries.
Global competition is another major factor affecting the U.S. position, because more countries are investing heavily in research, artificial intelligence, renewable energy, biotechnology, and digital innovation. And even though the U.S. remains strong in many of these fields, its leadership is no longer guaranteed, meaning it must continue to improve its systems and support new ideas if it wants to stay ahead in global technology development.
Another challenge is the changing nature of global markets, because consumers around the world are buying different types of products compared to past decades, and countries like India, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Mexico are increasingly becoming major centers for production and growth, attracting companies that once relied primarily on the US or Europe. And this shift redistributes economic activity to different regions rather than concentrating it in one or two major economies.
The U.S. also faces challenges in education, because strong economic leadership depends on having a well-trained population with skills in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But many experts say the American education system experiences inequalities, varying quality levels, and limited access for some communities, which makes it harder for the country to produce enough highly skilled workers who can support advanced industries in the future.
Innovation is another area where the US must continue to focus its efforts, because while the country has a long history of producing world-changing inventions, strong research programs, and successful companies, maintaining this level of innovation requires continuous investment in universities, laboratories, and entrepreneurs. And when funding becomes inconsistent or outdated, the ability to create new ideas and new technologies can slow down.
These educational and innovation challenges are important because the global economy is moving rapidly toward advanced technology, artificial intelligence, automation, clean energy systems, and digital services, and countries that develop strong capabilities in these areas will play a major role in shaping the world's economic future. So the U.S. must constantly adapt to these changes if it wants to maintain its leading position.
Another point to consider is that global economic power is shifting over time, not because the US is becoming weaker, but because other countries are becoming stronger. And as more nations invest in infrastructure, build their middle classes, expand trade networks, and improve education systems, the world's economic activity becomes more balanced and distributed across many regions rather than being concentrated in a single country.
Economists often describe this transition as a natural part of global development, because as the world becomes more connected, opportunities spread more evenly, allowing developing nations to grow faster and catch up with advanced economies. And while the U.S. still has many advantages, such as a large consumer market, world-class universities, and strong financial systems, it must continuously address challenges like competition, debt, education, and innovation to remain at the top.
What we learn from these challenges is that staying number one is not simply about economic size, but about how well a country can prepare for future changes, support new industries, train skilled workers, encourage technology, and maintain strong relationships with international partners. And these factors together determine how effectively the US can respond to global shifts and continue to play a leading role in the world economy.
So, when we look at the future of global economic leadership, we can see that the United States still holds many strengths, but it also faces important obstacles that require thoughtful planning and long-term solutions. And understanding these challenges helps us see why the question of whether China will overtake the US is complex and depends on many moving parts, not simply one single factor. As we continue our discussion, one of the most common questions people ask is, when could China potentially overtake the United States in terms of economic size? This is not an easy question to answer because predictions vary widely among economists, and different experts use different methods, assumptions, and data to make their forecasts. Some focus on China's rapid growth in technology, exports, and domestic consumption, while others consider challenges like an aging population, slower productivity gains, and global trade uncertainties. And these differences in perspective naturally lead to different conclusions about the timing and likelihood of China surpassing the US.
To help our listeners understand this, we can think about three main scenarios. In the first scenario, if China continues to grow quickly, invests heavily in technology, maintains strong domestic consumption, and successfully navigates global trade, it could potentially surpass the US within a few decades. In the second scenario, if growth slows due to internal challenges like population aging, debt, or productivity limits, then China may catch up more slowly, or the competition may remain close for a long time without one country clearly overtaking the other. The third scenario involves stable competition, where both economies continue to grow but remain relatively similar in size, sharing global influence in different sectors, and maintaining a balance rather than a clear leader emerging quickly.
It is important to note that even the most optimistic predictions about China overtaking the US are based on assumptions, not certainties. Economists have to make estimates about population growth, technological innovation, investment levels, and government policies, all of which can change over time. Therefore, these forecasts should be seen as tools to understand possibilities, not as guarantees of what will happen. Economic forecasting is always uncertain because many factors are difficult to predict and global conditions can change rapidly.
For English learners, it is useful to notice how we talk about future possibilities in simple English. We use words like could, may, if, and potentially, which show that something might happen but is not certain. These words are important in discussions about economics, science, and planning because they help us describe uncertainty in a clear and polite way. In the context of China and the US, these words help explain that even though China is growing fast, predicting the exact timing of overtaking the US is complex and depends on many factors.
Another point to understand is that the comparison between the two economies depends on how we measure size. Some forecasts look at nominal GDP, which uses current exchange rates and gives a direct comparison in US dollars. Others use purchasing power parity, or PPP, which adjusts for differences in the cost of living and provides a different perspective on economic strength. Depending on which method is used, China may appear to be closer to the US or slightly behind, which is why predictions vary so much among experts and why it is important to understand the context behind the numbers.
We should also remember that overtaking the US is not just about having a bigger number for GDP. Economic strength includes factors like innovation, technology leadership, financial systems, global trade influence, and education. Even if China's GDP grows larger than the US in certain calculations, the United States may continue to hold advantages in areas such as high-tech research, global finance, and education, which means that global economic influence depends on more than just one measure.
Finally, it is very important to remind our listeners that long-term predictions are always uncertain. Changes in government policies, global economic conditions, technological breakthroughs, or unexpected events like natural disasters or financial crises can all influence the trajectory of both economies. While we can discuss trends and possibilities, no one can predict the future with certainty, and that is why economists present multiple scenarios instead of a single definitive answer.
For learners of English, this section also shows how we can discuss complex topics in simple, neutral language. Words like scenario, forecast, potential, uncertain, and possibility are often used in economic and business discussions, and understanding how they fit into sentences helps you talk and write clearly about future events, risks, and opportunities, not only in economics, but in everyday planning as well.
In conclusion, the question of when China could overtake the US has no simple answer. It depends on growth rates, population trends, global trade, innovation, and a wide range of unpredictable factors. What we can do is study the trends, understand the challenges, and use clear English to describe possibilities and outcomes without assuming certainty. This approach helps us think critically, learn English, and gain a better understanding of the global economy.
So, dear listeners, remember that economic comparisons are like looking at a moving picture rather than a single snapshot. China and the United States will continue to grow, compete, and influence the world in different ways. And by following these trends in simple English, you are learning not only new vocabulary, but also how to think carefully and neutrally about complex international issues.
As we continue our podcast, it is important to understand that the economic competition between China and the United States does not only affect these two countries, but it also has a major impact on the world. Global trade, which means the buying and selling of goods and services between countries, is influenced by the economic growth of both nations. For example, when China exports products to other countries, it helps provide affordable goods for consumers, and when the United States innovates in technology, it creates new tools and services that are used globally. These activities show how closely connected economies are today, and how changes in one major country can affect businesses and people around the world.
Another important factor is technology development and innovation. Both China and the United States are leaders in research, artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and digital services, and the competition between them encourages faster development of new technologies. When these countries create new tools, other nations can adopt these technologies, improve their own industries, and offer new services to their populations. For English learners, it is interesting to see how innovation can influence jobs, education, communication, and daily life. And understanding this helps learners connect language learning with real-world knowledge.
Global markets, which include stocks, currencies, commodities, and investments, are also affected by these two economies. For instance, if China grows rapidly, international companies may choose to invest more in China, while changes in the United States can influence the value of the dollar or global interest rates. Both countries have the power to shape trade policies, global supply chains, and investment flows, which affects countries of all sizes. For people studying English, following these events provides useful vocabulary and phrases such as global influence, market trends, investment, export, and import, which appear frequently in international news.
It is also important to understand the balance between cooperation and competition. Even though China and the United States compete in many areas, they also cooperate on issues like trade agreements, climate change initiatives, scientific research, and international organizations. This combination of working together while competing encourages stability in the world economy. Learning about this cooperation helps English learners understand phrases like mutual interest, partnership, and collaboration, which are often used in both business and daily conversations to describe how people or countries work together despite differences.
Competition itself can be positive because it encourages efficiency, innovation, and improvement. When countries compete, businesses work harder to create better products, improve services, and find solutions to complex problems. This dynamic also teaches us that global economic changes are not simply about winning or losing. They are about progress, adaptation, and the ability to respond to challenges effectively. For English learners, listening to discussions like this shows how descriptive language can explain abstract concepts like competition, growth, and opportunity in clear terms.
Understanding these global changes also helps learners see why international news is important in English. Many newspapers, videos, and podcasts talk about trade, technology, and international cooperation, and by learning vocabulary related to these topics, students can follow stories more easily, discuss current events with others, and improve comprehension skills. Words like innovation, supply chain, global demand, and economic growth are repeated in different contexts, and recognizing them helps learners understand real-life discussions in English more effectively.
Global economic shifts also show how interconnected the world has become. Decisions made in Beijing or Washington can influence employment, production, and consumer prices in Africa, Europe, Latin America, or Asia. This connection means that learners who understand the global economy in simple English gain not only language skills, but also a better understanding of international relationships, trade dynamics, and the role of major economies in shaping opportunities worldwide.
Another point to consider is how these changes influence education, jobs, and daily life. For example, as new industries grow in technology, renewable energy, and international trade, people everywhere need to learn new skills and adapt to changing markets. English becomes an important tool because it is often used as a language of business, research, and communication across borders. Understanding how major economies operate helps learners see the practical importance of English in global discussions, improving both language skills and knowledge of world events.
Finally, recognizing the influence of China and the United States on global development encourages learners to think critically about international news. It teaches us that economic growth, trade, and technological advancement are complex and interconnected, and that the balance between cooperation and competition shapes the world in ways that affect everyone. For English learners, discussing these topics slowly and clearly is a way to practice comprehension, expand vocabulary, and understand how language is used to explain complex real-world situations.
In conclusion, the relationship between the United States and China teaches us that the global economy is not static. It is constantly changing due to trade, innovation, policy decisions, and international cooperation. By following these developments in simple English, learners can strengthen their vocabulary, improve listening comprehension, and connect language skills with knowledge about the world, making learning both practical and interesting.
When we learn about big topics like global trade or the world economy, it is also important to understand how to talk about these subjects in everyday English. Many English learners feel shy when discussing global issues because they think the vocabulary is too difficult. But the truth is that you can express these ideas using simple, clear sentences. For example, instead of saying China's economic expansion demonstrates structural transformation, you can simply say, China's economy is growing and changing. Both ideas are similar, but one is easier and more natural for everyday conversations. In this part of the podcast, we want to show you how to build confidence and speak about global topics in a simple but effective way.
That's right, Adam. Many students want to sound knowledgeable, but they don't know where to start. So let's begin with one helpful idea. You can always describe global economics by using 3 simple steps: what is happening, why it matters, and how people react. For example, if someone asks you about the competition between the United States and China, you can say, both countries have big economies. They are growing in different ways, and their decisions affect other countries. This sentence is easy, but it shows that you understand the topic and can explain it clearly. When you practice this structure, you can talk about many global subjects: technology, trade, energy, development, and more.
Another helpful skill is learning how to share your opinion politely. In English, people often use softening phrases when they want to express their ideas without sounding too strong. You can say, I think, in my opinion, or some experts believe. These phrases show that you are giving your view in a respectful way. For example, if someone asks you whether China will become the largest economy, you can say, in my opinion, it could happen, but it depends on many things. This style of speaking is clear, friendly, and accepted in international conversations.
Let's look at a few simple sentence patterns that you can practice at home. You can say, the US economy is strong because it has many innovative companies. Or, China's economy is growing because people are spending more and industries are expanding. These sentences connect cause and effect in a natural way. You can also compare ideas by using words like however, but, or while. For example, China has a large manufacturing sector, but the US leads in research and technology. With sentences like these, you can talk about world events with confidence.
Another important point is understanding how to ask questions in a clear way. Good learners ask good questions. You can ask, why is this country growing quickly? How does this policy affect the economy? Or, what do experts predict for the future? These questions help you learn more and show that you are actively thinking. Asking questions also helps you build conversations with friends, classmates, or language partners. When you use simple English to ask meaningful questions, you automatically improve your speaking skills.
And remember, your goal is not to sound like an economist. Your goal is to express ideas clearly in English. Even native speakers often use simple words when talking about complex topics. You don't need to worry about using perfect academic vocabulary. You only need to practice explaining ideas in short, understandable sentences. Over time, your vocabulary will grow, your confidence will improve, and you will find it easier to join global conversations.